caused by tonight on Judge for Yourself.
Welcome back. Tariffs being slapped on South Africa by the United States, expected tomorrow, are making businesses worried about exports. But the South African Canegrowers Association is concerned about imports as well. Sugarcane growers are reporting a better harvest than last year, but the association says cheap sugar imports are flooding South Africa and displacing the production of local growers. We're joined by the CEO of SA Canegrowers Association. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Thomas Funke. So it sounds like there will be a lot of sugar. Does this mean the farmers won't be able to sell it, though?
Correct. So for every ton that's imported into South Africa, we have to export a ton at a loss of about 6,000 Rand a ton onto this dumped world market. And that's obviously bad for revenue and bad for the growers in South Africa.
All right, and you are threatened by the 30% on one hand, high export tariffs and low import tariffs. Is that what the problem is?
That's correct. So on the one hand, we're being faced by this 30%, even possibly 40% import tariff for our exports into the USA. We've had a long-standing relationship with them, and it's actually a very good market to be exporting to, but this tariff might make it uneconomical for us to sell into that market, so we'll have to find another market then. And back home in South Africa, you know, we've got sub-production cost import protection, and that means we've got cheap sugar flooding into our country and displacing South African sugar, and with that obviously putting a lot of jobs at risk.
How coming the sugar coming in can undercut the cost of your production or the farmer's production?
Sugar is an interesting commodity worldwide. Many of the countries worldwide have a policy or a sugar act in place that incentivizes them and subsidizes them to produce too much sugar. And by doing that, they then sell the sugar at below cost of production onto the world market, and that's why world sugar is so cheap. And there are only a few countries like Brazil, for example, that can actually survive at those prices. Most countries can't, and South Africa falls into that category. So this cheap sugar on the world market then floods into the country and just displaces South African sugar, and thereby obviously impacts on the job. So it's a structural issue on the world sugar market, and that's just how it's been for many, many years.
Does it count as dumping?
I think the definition of dumping is very specific, so that's why we've shied away from calling it dumped sugar. It is, however, very cheap sugar and very often subsidized by ethanol programs, biofuels, etc., in these other countries, and that gives them an advantage, I guess, over South Africa, and the ability to produce the sugar so cheaply. What also happens is once the sugar is imported into the country, it actually sells at the same price, or just slightly cheaper than South African sugar. So this notion of imported sugar being really cheap for the consumer is also wrong. The importer then makes a lot of money, and that money then again goes to their shareholders who might be sitting in New York or London or wherever else. And it's actually supporting other industries in other countries, whereas the South African industry, sugar industry specifically, and the jobs associated with as the million livelihoods that are dependent on our industry would then face economic ruin if that continues.
To play devil's advocate, those who are proponents of global trade would say don't protect industries just because they're not competitive. Is that the case here, or is it rather the structural issue that you talk about? Are higher import tariffs truly justified?
I think that's an interesting question. I think globally what we've seen, and as I mentioned earlier, only a few countries can actually survive at the world sugar price. And that's, for example, Brazil. Half of their sugar cane goes into biofuels. The biofuels regime in Brazil has been around for 50-odd years. heavily subsidized by government. So that sort of gives them the ability to actually be able to compete at those prices. South Africa and many other countries around the world who produce sugar locally support these jobs, and they've got these policies in place that protect the local industries and actually more govern the relationship between the farmers and the millers, because sugarcane is a very unique commodity, and it requires some regulation amongst the parties. So I guess that's a bit of the answer, that because of this relationship between the processor and the producer, there are these policies in place. In South Africa, the jobs that are associated with our industry are very important. Rural areas in KZN and Mpumalanga don't have other economic opportunities. And if you think about the on-farm jobs, 60,000 of those, the indirect jobs, 250,000, and all of these jobs support families, and those people are really dependent on the sugar industry for an income. The cane farming and the milling, obviously very important for their well-being and their survival.
And I guess we never as a country want to run out of sugar or have an industry wiped out and then we can't import in future. Or to me personally, sugar is important to have.
Yes, so, but for us, more important are the jobs. I mean, these rural areas, we've looked at all kinds of other crops that could be grown. And with our small farms that we have, our topography, our hills in KZN, the sandy soils, there's just nothing else that can compete with sugarcane. So it's so important to keep that crop alive and that industry alive in order to maintain those jobs. You know, if the decision gets taken that jobs aren't important in South Africa, then we've got a whole different debate. But at this stage, the million livelihoods matter to us, and we need to do everything we can to protect those.
So why do you think government is not responding?
I think the wheels of government turn slowly. In the past, we've had great support from Minister Patel. And I guess when the GNU came into power, everyone's still finding their feet, and we're getting hopefully closer in our master plan phase 2 with our minister, who is Minister Parks Tau. So we look forward to a relationship where we can actually build this industry and grow it. Biofuels, aviation fuel, bioplastics, all of those are huge opportunities for us in our industry in South Africa. So, yeah, I think going forward, there's lots of potential to collaborate, and hopefully we'll also, have a mindset of protecting local industries, protecting local jobs. I think what's happening elsewhere in the world is really a testament of how governments are trying to protect what is produced locally, and hopefully we'll get that same mindset in South Africa.
All right, thank you, CEO of SA Canegrowers Association, Dr. Thomas Funke. Now, the clock is ticking down to US President Donald Trump's tariff deadline, with just a day before